Hello, One Great Earth. My name is Dan. I hope you are doing well. Today we're going to talk about a few serious issues. First, I need to get this out of the way. This is a Patreon account that I created for One Great Earth after YouTube told me in so many words that they will not monetize my channel. I'll read this here, this post I pinned at the top of the One Great Earth Patreon account, which the link is in the description of this video. Hello and welcome. I'm excited to start a Patreon. You can join for free. You can join for free. Any Patreon you can join for free, it'll say free up there, and you'll be able to follow updates that way as well. Instead of, I'm not sure exactly where I'm going to go with it. This is all still new. So I don't know if I'm going to do Patreon exclusive streams or just Discord channel, something. But this is just the very start, and I'm very excited. Definitely. More context. Google suspended my ads account due to shocking content and other claims. I made a mistake when I created this YouTube account some 10 years ago by marking it as an organization instead of an individual. While an account change type is possible, Google did not like what my material said. An appeal can only happen as an organization if I have the business documentation. Since they won't change my type to individual, I cannot actually appeal without creating an actual business. Coupled with users reporting me have made it impossible to ever use Google Ads on One Great Earth again. I do not want to walk away from this channel, so I made this Patreon. And I have 4 members already. Thank you. I would say thank you to Michonne, thank you to Sarah, and thank you to Ashley. Thank you very much. There is also as I mentioned, there are memberships. There are $5 memberships. I will read the names off those members on every stream. Alright. Children in war zones. This is from The Guardian, authored by Lizzie Dearden. Children, use it a little more. Children trapped in war zones because of UK refusal to ease refugee visa rules. Abject failure of family reunion scheme to provide legal please note, Americans, scheme isn't something tricksy. They're not trying to get something over on somebody. You see this a lot internationally as schemes, but it's not the same what we're probably used to in the States. Are you scheming on me? That's not a good thing. Abject failure of family reunion scheme to provide legal route is leaving children at risk of trafficking or even death. Children are being trapped in war zones as a result of impossible bureaucratic requirements imposed on one of the few legal routes for asylum seekers the charity has found. The government has championed family reunion processes as a means for refugees to safely reunite with loved ones in Britain. But according to a new report by Ramphel, a charity that supports vulnerable migrants, the scheme is not fit for purpose, and applicants have been abandoned, leaving them at risk of trafficking or even death. Ramphel said that when the conflict broke out in the Sudan in April 2023, it was supporting 14 people, all of which could qualify to come to the UK under the same scheme. But over a year later, 8 remain trapped there and facing extreme risks. Several are children who previously fled Eritrea, a repressive dictatorship that conducts forcible mass conscription of men, women, and children. 2 other boys saw a loved one killed when their home was raided and looted in Sudan. Some of the teenagers have now fled Sudan on irregular routes, with 1 boy detained in Libya and another unaccompanied child being trafficked to South Sudan and raped. Just 2 of the children who were in Sudan when conflict erupted have arrived in the UK, and despite closing its visa application center in Khartoum, the government, which Khartoum is the capital of Sudan, the government has not agreed to waive requirements for applicants to register their fingerprints and biometric information in person. Now, Khartoum is seeing a lot of violence a lot of grief, a lot of death, and I believe one day last week over 100 people were killed. It's been over 1 year since the civil war broke out by the Russian-backed Rapid Support Forces and the Sudanese military. People tried evacuating, tried escaping the violence, but it spread. Now other countries would have to take in hundreds of thousands, not millions, of refugees due to this war. South Sudan, south of Sudan, is just half a giant wetland that's currently burning on fire. It has probably nothing to do with the giant war going on in the north. It's a lot of tragedy, a lot of tragic losses for the world. You see the giant wetland in South Sudan that's currently been on fire for months now. The fires have been zombies just lumbering around, not going out, and just continuing to consume any kind of material that it could. And it's a wetland too, but it's not all year around that this wetland is filled with water to the point that it's submerged land. And a wetland, even though that it's submerged land, will still have its shrubbery and everything up top. So there still would be burning, plus people live around there. Although South Sudan, as I recall, is a low population country. I believe 600,000 people. I mean, it is not very much, I don't believe. It's not like Nigeria with 230 million people living in that country alone in Africa. Africa is hard to cover. It is hard. It moves fast, and there are complications with countries that are pulling out of the African Union. It's very complicated, and something that I would like to talk about more later, one day. Not today. This is not the time to talk about other politics. We're talking about children in war zones. But I digress. Just 2 of the children who were in Sudan when conflict erupted, they arrived in the UK, and despite closing its visa application center in Khartoum, the government has not agreed to waive requirements for applicants to register their fingerprints and biometric information in person. Visa application centers are now open and operating in neighboring countries, reads a Home Office letter. However, travel across Sudan is conducted at your own risk and under your own discretion, considering whether it is safe to do so. An Eritrean refugee living in the UK told of his desperate efforts to have at least 2 young brothers, now aged 17 and 14, join him. They fled to Sudan alone after their mother died and their father was seized by Eritrean authorities, and were living in a refugee camp when fighting started. In this image, a Sudanese girl who fled the war in Sudan with her family carries her belongings after arriving at a transit center for refugees in Rank, South Sudan. I made the family reunion application, but the Home Office was saying that there was not a place to test them for tuberculosis or a visa center in Sudan, said Youssef. They said they couldn't take them. As the conflict spread, his brothers fled north from Khartoum and into Egypt. That's a long, long journey. Khartoum to Egypt? And such hardships, such awful extremes. Being forced to walk that distance, pretty much in the dark as well, is intense, very intense to think. Leaving Khartoum, Sudan, heading to Egypt. Wow. They don't have anyone. How will they survive? Youssef asked. If the police find them asleep, they will take them back to Eritrea and they will be put in prison. They are still in this situation and they're very scared. Youssef, who traveled to the UK himself as a teenager in 2018 and has since been granted refugee status, said he did not understand why his young brothers could not have been allowed on a plane to Britain from Sudan. The Home Office did not consider a request to bypass biometric enrollment for the children in October last year, and Rafel is now attempting to have them registered in Cairo. Youssef said he would not stop his efforts to bring them to safety in the UK, adding, "I'm the only person they have. I am the only one that can help them." Rafel cited the Sudan War as an example of the abject failure of the family reunion process, which is primarily for children and spouses of UK residents and can only be expanded to siblings and other relatives under a separate, more restricted scheme. The charity argues that the situation is driving greater numbers of refugees on the irregular routes that ultimately result in small boat crossings over the English Channel, which are running at record high. Nick Beals, head of campaigning at the charity, said the UK's family reunion system is not fit for purpose, and this report shows it does not act as an effective safe route for refugees seeking to come to the UK. For people in places such as Sudan and Gaza, they are prevented from even applying for family reunion due to the government's inflexible and unreasonable insistence on them attending non-existing visa application centers. This leaves those in conflict zones, including unaccompanied children, with no choice but to take dangerous journeys in search of family reunion. Ramphel called for the next government to create a process that allows those with loved ones in the UK to swiftly and safely secure visas for legal travel to Britain. Home Office figures show that 9,764 refugees were granted family reunion visas in 2023, of half of which were children. The department said fingerprints and facial images were necessary for identity and suitability checks on foreign nationals who are subject to immigration control, and that people who could not travel to visa application centers can contact us to explain their circumstances. The UK is trying to do hands-off approach to migration. Very sad. After pretty much kicking out anyone that wasn't a native UK citizen, this family plan scheme only applies to UK residents that are trying to pull family from places of conflict, not from people that have become nationalized citizens or citizens regardless, trying to pull for their families from the same areas they came from. It is heartbreaking. I can't imagine a family being separated like this permanently. The mother was killed in the combat, probably in one of the killing fields. It was a very bloody war between the Ethiopian army and the Eritrean army. There was a lot of death, and as many as 170,000 people perished, I believe the number was. It was a very brutal, very grueling, grinding war that lasted 2 years. But the combat, the fear, and the anxiety is still not over. People are still not safe in these regions where there is war. They're not able to get safety. And the UK is okay with that. They know the consequence of these people not able to flee to safety, flee the combat. They're worried about migration, worried about migrants, worried about anyone that isn't white. Terrible. And these children, these kids, walking from Khartoum to Egypt by themselves. Like, as a kid, I couldn't imagine taking a bus by myself. I mean, a city bus. This is his survival. This is horrible. This isn't talked about enough. It's been over a year since this civil war has erupted in Khartoum, and information is scarce. It's a lot of witness testimony and people posting videos, but that was months ago. Like, it's gone dark. It's savage. Ruling war between two armies that don't want to give up power. And all the citizens are being caught in the crossfire. Everyone is caught in the crossfire. I do not remember the demands made by the Rapid Support Forces, but it probably has to do with them being federalized, them being part of an actual army outfit and not just a paramilitary group. Probably, I guess. Canadian warship sharing an anchorage with Russian vessels in Cuba. This is an interesting article from CBC News, Canada, Canadian Broadcasting Channel. Defense Minister authorized Havana visit of Canada's HMCS Margaret Brooke. Canadian Naval Patrol boat HMCS Margaret Brooke passes by Russian nuclear-powered cruise missile submarine Kazan and frigate Admiral Gorshkov as it enters Havana's Bay in Cuba on Friday. The Royal Canadian Navy now finds itself in an unusual position of both shadowing Russian warships as a threat in the Caribbean and sharing anchorage with them as a guest in the port of Havana. Because Canada accepted an invitation to send a patrol ship to Cuba while the Russian Navy is in town. And it's not clear just who in the government or the military knew about the invitation from Cuba. The Caribbean nation has been a full-throated supporter of Russian President Vladimir Putin's war on Ukraine, and Cubans have been fighting alongside Russian soldiers in that country. For several days, the frigate HMCS Ville de Quebec has been tasked with shadowing the Russian ships which conducted missile exercises during the Atlantic crossing using Moscow's new Zircon hypersonic missiles. The missiles that weren't supposed to be able to be shot down, and Ukraine is like, watch, starts shooting them down. What does Russia do? They start jailing all the engineers and scientists that had anything to do with the missile. You said this was unshootable downable. Something. But that's what they were paid to say. It's what of course they're going to say. It's a hypersonic missile. How can you shoot it down? Patriot batteries, shoot them down. Ukraine needs patriots badly. The front line of the war in Ukraine is the entire distance from Oregon, California, that border up the top and the coastline, all the way down to Baja County. It's a massive front line, and they only have so much manpower to spread themselves out between combat scenarios. Okay, love you. A Canadian CP-140 surveillance plane flying out of Jacksonville, Florida, is also keeping a close eye on the Russians. The destroyer USS Donald Cook also appears to have joined the mission in the Caribbean, in addition to U.S. naval surveillance aircraft. And yet, on Friday, Canada's Harry DeWolf-class offshore patrol vessel, sorry about the dogs barking, patrol vessel, HMCS Margaret Brooke, sailed into Havana as a guest of the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Cuba, just hours after the Russian flotilla docked in the same harbor. Cuba invited the Canadians to Havana to celebrate the long-standing bilateral relationship between Canada and Cuba, according to a tweet by Canadian Joint Operations Command. No Canadian naval vessels had visited Cuba for more than 50 years until Justin Trudeau came to power at the end of 2015. In November 2016, he visited Havana hoping to meet the dying Fidel Castro. That didn't happen, but Trudeau did publicly embrace Raul Castro and the Castro brothers' chosen successor, Miguel Diaz-Canel, and caused Cuba an ally of Canada during a talk at the University of Havana. 3 days later, the frigate HMCS Frederickson set sail for Havana for a visit. Then Defense Minister Harjit Sajjan said would celebrate the strong, positive, and productive relationship between Cuba and Canada. I don't like where this is going. The Trudeau government's relationship with the Cuban Communist Party regime has frequently drawn criticism from Canada's Cuban community. When Cubans took to the streets to demand the end of the 62-year dictatorship on July 11, 2021, Cuban Canadians accused the Trudeau government of downplaying their political demands and attempting to misrepresent Cubans' demands for democracy as mere gripes about shortages of food and medicines. The Margaret Brooke is the first Canadian warship to visit Havana since the Federation and the second to visit Cuba. Many in the Cuban Canadian community says it's less appropriate than ever for Canada to appear to bolster the Cuban regime in the wake of harsher crackdown on dissidents that have seen the return of decades-long sentences for political prisoners. They also cite Cuba's new and far-reaching alliance with Putin's Russia, Moscow's footprint in Cuba, which includes the reopened Lord's spy base, is now bigger than it has been since the end of the Cold War. Mixed messages from Canada. It was initially unclear who in the Canadian government authorized the Havana visit or who knew that the Margaret Brooke had been invited at the same time as the Russians. However, a spokesperson for Defense Ministry Bill Blair said on Saturday that the minister authorized the port visit on the advice of the Navy and Canadian Joint Operations Command. We believe that this marked an especially important time to show a Canadian presence in the region. On Friday, a spokesperson for the Department of National Defense told CBC News that the department was aware that Russians would be in Havana port on the same days as the Canadians. But when asked about the visit on CBC's Power Politics on Thursday evening, Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly told host David Cochran she knew nothing about it. This is something I have to look more closely into, she said. This is information that is news to me. 4 hours later, Global Affairs Canada spokesperson John Babcock suggested that the Cuba visit was part of deliberate departmental strategy. Amidst global insecurity, Canada believes in pragmatic diplomacy and to engage countries of different perspectives while we continue to uphold our values and interest and defend the international rules-based order, he told CBC News. The friendly visit sends a confusing message about Canada's allegiances, said Russian political scientist Vladimir Rovinsky, director of the CIES Research Center at ICASI University in Colombia, and an expert on Russia's presence in the Western Hemisphere. I think it's a very unfortunate situation for Canada, he told CBC News. It also shows that one has to be very careful when doing this kind of planning with Cuba, he said. Knew that Russians would come and Canada would come at the same time, of course. Cuba has its own motives for wanting Canada to revisit, said Rovinsky. Cuba is interested in finding a way to pressure the Western countries to change their attitude towards Cuba, he said. But by putting Canada in an embarrassing situation, he said, Cuba risks damaging its relationship with Ottawa. The most obvious beneficiary of this situation is Russia, he said. There is very important symbolic component in what is happening now in Havana Bay for Russia. He said, Russia, he argued, is sending NATO a message that if it's going to be in Russia's backyard, Russia is capable of playing their own game in such a distant territory as the Russian hemisphere in the Caribbean, causing embarrassment to Canada and creating the impression that Western allies are divided over Russia makes the symbolism even more valuable to Moscow, he added. It's also, the message is to be able to say who is controlling what. Visit gives a boost to Communist Party. Eloy Vera is a Cuban independent journalist with the public El Toque, a popular online publication in the island that annoys Cuban authorities by publishing black market exchange rates for dollars and euros. He said that the Communist Party will use the Canadian visit domestically to try to show the Cuban people that the country is not diplomatically isolated. The image they want to send us the world is we are with everyone, we are close to Russia, but at the same time we are close to one of its adversaries, in this case Canada. Vera said Canada was unwise to accept the invitation. That's one of the main problems when a democratic government like Canada deals with an autocratic regime like Cuba's. You are taking the risk to be manipulated by someone that is a master in manipulation, he said. Everything in part of the game that right now is being handled from Havana. It's not handled from Ottawa, it's being handled from Havana. Nothing happens by coincidence. Juan Antonio Blanco Gil is a former Cuban diplomat and historian who lives in Miami and has written extensively about Cuba's foreign policy. Nothing happens by coincidence, and the Russians were planning this with the Cubans, he told CBC News. Had the Cubans been interested in sparing the Canadians from an awkward cohabitation with the Russian flotilla, he said, it would have been very easy to change the date a little bit before or after the event of the Russians. They didn't. So there was a point in trying to bring together these two forces in Havana. The Russian ships are expected to leave Cuba on Monday and head for Venezuela, where the Nicolas Maduro government is another major backer of Putin and the war in Ukraine. The Canadian Armed Forces will continue to track the movements and activities of the Russian Navy flotilla after it departs Havana. Kenneth Saduko of DND told CBC News. Blanco said the Cuban and the Venezuela regimes face a difficult summer and have reasons for wanting the Russian ships close by. The Maduro regime agreed to hold elections this year as part of a deal to escape sanctions, although that deal fell apart in April. While Maduro has banned the main opposition candidate from running, and few expect a genuinely free vote, his United Socialist Party knows it faces a major challenge. White House, Pentagon may have to think twice. They want the Russians to show the flag in Caribbean for two reasons. The Venezuelans, because they have very difficult political crises with the incoming election, and the Cubans, who are going through the worst economic, social, political crisis of the last 65 years. They are also asking for this fleet to be there because they have to eventually use lethal force to contain demonstrations. They would like the Russians to be around to complicate decisions in the White House and the National Security Council. Blanco said that if the U.S. wished to retaliate against either country for some crackdown, they would have to think twice if they have Russians in the middle of the Caribbean Sea going around. I think that is a calculation of the Cubans. Although U.S. intelligence has assessed that neither the Zircon missiles on the Admiral Gorkov nor the Caliber missiles in the Kazan are fitted with nuclear warheads, though both are nuclear capable, Blanco said that he believes Havana would like to persuade the Kremlin to change that posture. What the Cubans are dreaming of and what they are working for is to inspire Putin into placing a continuous nuclear presence in Cuba through the fleet. Cuban missile crisis all over again. Blanco points out that Russia has every right to send its ships fully armed anywhere in international waters, and can even transit the Panama Canal with nuclear weapons aboard. By simply rotating vessels such as the Gorshkov or the Kazan through the region, he said, Cuba could threaten the continental U.S. with more megatons of close-range missiles than it could have using all land-based missiles it had in 1962. You don't need to reenact the Cuban Missile Crisis. Blanco said there continues to be a mismatch between Canada's friendly and trusting approach to the Cuban Communist Party and Havana's more pragmatic view of Canada. The Cubans have very clear in their mind who are their enemies, the United States and the West, and that includes Canada, like it or not. The Canadians have never really been digested that they are seen in Havana as the enemy, as being part of the enemy because they're part of the West, they're in alliance with the United States. Havana can use Canada's pride in its independent foreign policy on Cuba to drive a wedge between the two NATO allies at a time when both Cuba and Russia are moving closer because of the war in Ukraine, Blanco said. In the minds of the Cuban elite, Canada is not a friend. It's a country that they can, I don't want to use the word manipulate, but they can kind of dance around and make them act in ways that would not align totally with the main enemy, which obviously is the United States. The Canadians, from their view, believe that all these gestures are sorry for my phone ringing there. In the minds of the Cuban elite, Canada is not a friend. It is a country that they can, I do not want to use the word manipulate, but they can kind of dance around and make them act in ways that would not align totally with the main enemy, which obviously is the United States. The Canadians, from their view, believe that all these gestures are going to be constructive and help to bring the Cuban elite to their senses and have them open up to a peaceful transition. I am positive that they believe so, and I'm positive that they are wrong in the calculation, unfortunately. I would love them to be right, but unfortunately, from my perspective, I don't think that they are. So it's something else we're seeing here. It's who knew what when. Is Canada okay docking with Russia and Cuba at the same time? That is not a good look. Canada, that is not a good look for you. These ships have killed Ukrainian lives. This is a big deal. Sharing a port with one of their nuclear submarines that can fire a nuclear warhead at the United States from where they are right now is very detrimental to wherever we are with Cuba in these days. This is just strange. Very strange. And Canada just seemed to keep going with it. What is Canada playing at here? What did they think would happen? What did they think it would look like after they docked, knowing, oh, is that a Russian warship, and is that a Russian submarine? Russian nuclear submarine? Capable of firing caliber missiles? Not a good look for Canada. And Canada just keeps stepping on rakes one after another. At the beginning of the war, when they were going to repair and send a giant turbine that Russia asked for, we're like, what are you doing? Canada just like can't say no. I don't understand it. This is dangerous waters. It's from the Telegraph. Oh yeah, so this is this article is from the CBC, Evan Dyer. This is from the Telegraph. Nicholas Smith in Jerusalem. Hamas admits it doesn't know how many hostages are still alive. Limited release of captives is a crucial part of ceasefire plan. International brokers are trying to help negotiate between Hamas and Israel. A senior Hamas official has admitted the terrorist group has no idea how many of Israel's remaining 120 hostages in Gaza are alive or dead. Osama Hamdan, a Hamas spokesperson, political bureau member, told CNN that no one has an idea of how many of the hostages are still alive, and said that any deal to release them must include guarantees of a permanent ceasefire and the complete withdrawal of Israeli forces. The limited release of Israeli hostages is a crucial part of the three-part ceasefire plan that international brokers, including the United States, Qatar, and Egypt, are trying to help negotiate between Hamas and Israel. The fate of the hostages who were seized by terrorists and taken to Gaza on October 7th has become one of the most pressing and emotive domestic political issues for Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, who is facing mounting calls from the public to do more. This is after he had one of his cabinet members just resign as well. Ants. A total of 251 were kidnapped, and 105 were released during a week-long truce in November. 7 have been rescued from a captivity by the Israel Defense Forces, including 4 last weekend. Among them was Noah Aragamani, 26, who was seen in a viral video on October 7th pleading for her life while being snatched on a motorbike from the Nova Music Festival. Hostages rescued. On Thursday, the commando who led the team who rescued her said her first words were, "Is my mother alive?" Miss Aragamani was reunited with her mother, who has terminal brain cancer, later that day. Another hostage who was freed revealed he was held with Guy Gilboa Dalla, also captured at the Nova Festival a few months ago, providing the first sign of life for his family. While the rescue lifted Israel's morale, it also increased public demands for a quick recovery of the hostages amid further revelations of their physical and mental abuse in captivity. Following the raid, the IDF said a negotiated deal would be the best way to release the bulk of the remaining hostages. However, the current truce deal has stalled over unworkable amendments made by Hamas earlier this week. In his CNN interview in Beirut, Hamdan said the proposal on the table did not meet the group's demands for an end to the war. He said Hamas needed a clear position from Israel to accept the ceasefire, a complete withdrawal from Gaza, and let the Palestinians determine their future by themselves, the reconstruction, the lifting of the siege, and we are ready to talk about a fair deal about the prisoners' exchange. Speaking to reporters at the G7 summit in Italy on Thursday, Joe Biden, the U.S. president, said he did not believe a deal was imminent, but added, "I haven't lost hope." Hamas doesn't know how many hostages are left alive. "120 hostages remain unknown if they are alive or dead." These are the numbers. Al Jazeera. At least 37,296 people, including more than 15,000 children, have been killed. Over 85,000 people have been injured, and over 10,000 people, probably in the rubble, are missing. Because when Israel bulldozes areas, they are not searching for survivors, they are not searching for bodies. So that 10,000 people could be in the rubble. People can survive long periods of time in the rubble too. Israel is not searching for survivors. In the occupied West Bank, at least 548 people, including 135 children, have been killed. More than 5,200 people have been injured. In Israel, officials revised the death toll from the October 7 attacks down from 1,405 to 1,139. With the amount of people that have been fleeing Rafah, coming back to central Gaza, they're putting themselves in harm's way again. It's a dangerous path that they have to take because the areas are bulldozed and collapsed in corridors. So you don't have many choices which way to go. And if Israel wants to hit you with a drone, they're going to hit you with a drone, even if you're waving a white flag. They don't care. They have no value of human life. They want Gaza to be a graveyard. It's very unsettling just how much is celebrated when people in Gaza die and when people in the West Bank are mistreated. Is it because they're Arab? Is it because they're a different religion? Why is this such a heated war? There's no end in sight. I have no hope that a ceasefire would ever be achieved during this war. And I have no idea what will stop it as Israel continues its way into Rafah. They go deeper and deeper into Gaza, displacing more and more people, causing them to flee. They're running out of areas to go. They're running out of food, running out of water. Famine is imminent. "50,000 Gaza children require urgent treatment for malnutrition." This is from Al Jazeera. UNRWA warns people in Gaza face catastrophic levels of hunger because of Israeli restrictions on humanitarian aid. The UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, UNRWA, says more than 50,000 children in the Gaza Strip require immediate medical treatment for acute malnutrition. In a statement on Saturday, the agency noted with continued restrictions to humanitarian access, people in Gaza continue to face desperate levels of hunger. UNRWA teams work tirelessly to reach families with aid, but the situation is catastrophic. UNICEF spokesperson James Elder also described how difficult it is not only to get aid into Gaza, but also distribute it across the war-battered coastal enclave. More aid workers have been killed in this war than any war since the advent of the UN, he told Al Jazeera. On Wednesday, let me read that again. More aid workers have been killed in this war than any war since the advent of the United Nations. There have been over hundreds of medical workers killed, hundreds. On Wednesday, UNICEF had a mission to drive a truck full of nutritional and medical supplies for 10,000 children, Elder said. Their task was to deliver the aid, which was pre-approved by Israeli authorities, from Deir el-Balah to Gaza City, a 40-kilometer or 25 miles round trip. It took 13 hours, and we spent 8 of those around checkpoints, arguing around paperwork. Was it a truck or a van? He said. The reality is this truck was denied access. Those 10,000 children did not get that aid. Israel, as the occupying power, has a legal responsibility to facilitate that aid. One of the main land crossings in Rafah has been closed since Israeli forces seized the area early last month. The move has heightened fears of famine in southern and central Gaza. The UN's World Food Program Deputy Executive Director Carl Skul spent 2 days assessing the plight of Palestinians this week, saying the challenges are like nothing I have ever seen. The situation in southern Gaza is quickly deteriorating. 1 million people in southern Gaza are trapped without clean water or sanitation in a highly congested area along the beach in the burning summer heat. We drove through rivers of sewage. Now, for context, Rafah, population before the war, of 275,000 people. During the war, as people were forced to flee south further and further, this number became 1.5 million people. Now we have over 600,000 that have fled now, again, to central Gaza from southern Gaza. This is a trail of tears. We're seeing unprecedented amount of famine. I digress, I'm sorry. But no running water, sewage is everywhere. And there are hundreds of thousands of people on foot right now trying to find safety in their own trail of tears. For months, right-wing Israelis have been protesting and blocking roads to prevent aid shipments from reaching Gaza, further straining the flow of desperately needed aid to the territory. On Friday, the United States imposed sanctions on violent extremist Israeli group for blocking and damaging humanitarian aid convoys to Gaza. The group of 7 leaders also stressed UN agencies must work unhindered in Gaza. UNRWA, which coordinates nearly all aid to Gaza, has also been in crisis since January, when Israel accused about a dozen of its 13,000 Gaza employees of being involved in the October 7th Hamas attack on Israel. This claim led many nations, including top donor the U.S., to abruptly suspend funding to the agency, threatening its efforts to deliver aid. UNRWA Chief Philippe Lazzarini has repeatedly said Israeli moves to suspend funding are additional collective punishment for Palestinians already reeling from non-stop Israeli bombardment. At least 567,000 Palestinians in Gaza are one step away from famine. That's 25% of the 2.3 million people living in Gaza. What can we do? What can you possibly do when you have nothing? And there is nothing. Everything's destroyed, rubble, bulldozed, bombed, snipers everywhere. Also reading about reports of drone speakers using the sounds of crying children to lure people out with sniper fire. This is only going to get worse. This is not at all catastrophic. I thank you for viewing this video. If you're viewing it live, I thank you doubly. It's tragic. All right. I thank you for your time. If you haven't already, please like the stream, subscribe to the channel. It helps me out immensely and keeps me motivated in doing videos like this. Trying to build this channel through live streams, and it's difficult. It's a lot more difficult. But I was given some good advice. Taking it, I'm going through it. Again, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much for your viewership. If you haven't already, please like the stream, subscribe to the channel. Truly helps me keep me motivated in putting out content like this regarding this one great Earth. I thank you again. Please take care.